Welcome to the show. And I have with me tonight 2 guests and a 3rd host on the way. Introduce yourselves, but why don't we, before we do anything, say the name of the show together, just because that's what we like to do. Folks, go for it. Just a squirrel looking for a nut, trying to get out of this rut.
That is the slowest anybody has ever.
But it also just so happens to be the best that we have ever done. Welcome to the show, Jessica Dugas and Tripp Bodenheimer, also known as Bodie. It is good to have you here. I'm the main host of the evening, along with co-host Oleg, who's going to show up in a few minutes. And welcome to the very final episode of this live stream. It is a pleasure to have both of you here. Now, as usual, I'm going to start with a little story, and then I'm going to want you all to begin to take it away. The most famous epic in all of Greek mythology was the life of the hero Hercules. His birth was delayed by the goddess of timing, Hera, because she didn't want him to be born first so that he would be the king. And she didn't want him to be the king because he was the child of an affair that her husband Zeus had had with a mortal woman. So she prevented Hercules from being born until another king or another young man was born that would later become king. And Hera tortured Hercules through his whole life. He ended up having to do 12 unbelievably hard labors after he was driven into insanity by Hera and slaughtered his family. And through those labors, he found redemption. He had to confront who and what he was inside. The labors got harder and harder, but he grew and he grew and he grew. Finally, his labors were over and he thought he was at peace. He found another woman and he fell in love with her and they got married. Now, he went to help out another country in a battle. And after he had helped them win that battle, he told his wife that he wanted to have sent to him his very finest garment so that he could wear it to the ceremony that they would have to celebrate this country's victory. And his wife was jealous. She thought that he was sleeping with another woman. That's why he wanted to look so good. So she found his favorite garment, but she dipped it in the blood of a centaur that was poisonous. And then Hercules put on that garment and his skin set on fire. Literally, his skin burned off. And his muscles and his tissues were there, and they started just falling off of his bones. His eyes were dangling. His teeth were dangling. He was in an unbelievable pain. And he said to the world, "This is it. My epic is over." And he asked everyone around to help him build a funeral pyre, literally as his body was falling apart. He was chopping wood with everyone else and helping to light the torch. And then he jumped on it. And in that moment, when he jumped on it, and started to burn alive, thunder clapped, and the heavens opened. And Hercules became an Olympian. That was the end of his epic. Talk to me, Jessica or Bodie, about anything that you take away from that story about knowing when your epic or a part of your epic, a chapter of your story has ended. Bodie?
Oh, I was gonna.
Nice try. Go ahead.
First of all, I can listen to Scott tell a story on anything.
Right? Agree.
I'm so enthralled by what you tell us about Hercules. Yeah, for me, this is a topic that, I was thinking about this earlier today about when it's time for your story to end. And I think for me, emotion is the one thing that is attached to it the most. I think that whenever emotion is not there, emotion is faded, emotion is not as strong as it once was. I think a lot of times you're not emotionally invested in something. I think that is for me when it's time to change, walk away, close that chapter, what have you. I'm curious what you take away from that, Jessica.
It's interesting because I'm a walking musical. People know this about me. And as soon as we start talking about endings and beginnings, I hear Kenny Rogers in my head. The gambler, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. And I think about that every time. But I don't know. Here I am, the queen of joy myself, thinking about the fact that I know that every ending is also a new beginning for something else, even if it's, even in death. I mean, that ending, we don't know truly what comes after. We might have a faith or believe in different things, but it's the start of something else. We don't know what, even if that's just laying in the ground, it's the start of that. We just don't know. And so I have a really hard time with endings. Typically, I am very nostalgic. I like to kind of hang on to things. And sometimes things that we shouldn't be hanging on to. But I agree with you, Bodhi, that it's kind of like the emotion of things changes a little bit. The maybe the fire underneath things starts to change. I typically, like, we're coming up next Wednesday on the 4th anniversary of my network, of my main show, The Breakthrough Show. And 4 years is a long time for a show, in general terms. But I've asked myself several times over the last 4 years, many times I've asked myself, is this it? Like, is this the last one? Is this the last season? Is this going to be the last guest? And there's so many different layers to that, that to be able to, that it's almost hard to say, like, how do you know? I think it really is just an underlying feeling and just knowing like something's run its course.
I'm curious because you mentioned like seasons. I've been guilty of it watching a television series, and we say, "Oh, that should have ended a season or two ago." They went a season or two too. Dexter went a season or two too long.
A season or two?
Yeah,
exactly. 3 seasons, 4.
But why do you think that is? Like, why do you think it's? We have that feeling watching something, and if someone were to explain it to you, they're like, "Why? Why do you think it ended too soon?" I mean, is it development? Is it become stagnant? Like, why do you think that is?
Before we go to that, I did want to say hello to the Facebook user. For whatever reason, StreamYard isn't showing us the names of all of the users or the folks that are joining us tonight.
It's Miss Brittany.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here, Miss Brittany. And is this Miss Brittany as well?
Yes.
Wonderful. So thank you for joining us, and please keep putting in your comments, letting us know your thoughts. We definitely want to have that as part of the show and what we're talking about. And Jessica, I'm sorry, as well as Bodhi, both of you know that you should feel free to interject any thoughts or comments or responses to comments as we go forward tonight. So some endings are easier to go through, and other endings, and she definitely has had endings that she's held on for longer than she should have, and I definitely have too. A lot of times those endings have been related to relationships. Let's take it back to the TV shows real quick. My personal opinion is that so many times, particularly in literature, and I do consider quality television literature. Look, even not so good television can be literature. It's just not necessarily good literature, but has a natural arc. There are progressions that the story takes the characters through, if it's a character-driven story, or there is a subtext or a metaphorical point to the plot, that once that point has been made, it is, in my opinion, then done. That being said, when the authors of the story usually people that are looking to make significant amounts of money off of the story or have a vested interest in continuing their revenue streams keep it going, even though the core points have been made and there's nothing creatively or allegorically to add, then the story feels like it's dragging on for too long. Dexter is an interesting example because after a couple of seasons, we got it.
Yeah.
He was a psychopath. That's what it's like to live as a psychopath. He was a psychopath that was actually trying to be ethical. Not exactly believable, but that's okay. They were trying to put the audience in that position and have him come to a certain level of resolution as to his place in society, his mission, and all of that sort of stuff. And then after a while, what was being gained? How was the underlying message or the lessons that were to be taught to the audience being added to by all of these extra seasons? I failed to see it all together. Another example of that, I don't know if either of you watched this show, was Westworld. The first 2 seasons, particularly the end of the second season, the story was done. The third season to me just seemed like a new story that they're trying to shoehorn into a pre-existing set of characters and backdrops and all that, and it was boring and trite and all this sort of stuff. That's just me.
I think some of this depends on the person too. So an example that I can think of literally, because I just saw something about this. If you guys are familiar with the Anne of Green Gables series of books, and then they came out with, the books are incredible. And then they came out with the mini series on Canadian television back in, I think late 80s, early 90s, with Megan Follows. And they did the first 2 books. They did Anne of Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea. And they became beloved movies. And they're 2 of some of the first movies that I watched with my girls and just loved them so much. And then they came out with a third one. And you kind of started to see the division happen. You have the nostalgic people who are like, yes, keep it going. And then you have the other camp that were like, yeah, we loved it, but you're ruining it now. And then if that wasn't enough, they came out with a 4th one. And now Megan Follows isn't even in it. Now it's Barbara Hershey. And it's this whole thing. And it's literally ruined it for, I'm sorry I watched it. That it was that bad. I'm sorry, because it ruined it for me. But you really see that difference in people with that example, because you have those people that are really nostalgic that they don't want it ruined. And the other half of the people are really nostalgic, but they don't want it to end. And so I think it really, there's perspective plays a role in this as well. And just who we are as individuals.
I even think of, Scott, you may be familiar with this, Twin Peaks, David Lynch. They had season 1 of that. And the big, storyline was who murdered Laura Palmer. And people were writing into the network saying, we need to get a resolution to this. And they kind of rushed it. And I think it was like midway through season 2, they, said this is who the killer was. After that, there was no more emotion. Nobody else was invested in it for any reason. And it just fizzled out after that. But it was, once again, it was, everybody wanted to know. But then when they got their answer, they were, okay, now I have no more attachment to this.
I'll even say that about The Matrix. The first movie was a self-contained masterpiece that literally it was retelling a myth. And it told the myth and it ended. Let it go. Right. The next 2 didn't make any sense. They dragged on. That crap was boring. And then they come out with something new 20 years later, sort of like no one was asking. Star Wars.
Got that nostalgia.
What'd you say? Well, but then it also goes, and Star Wars, by the way, is a case.
Star Wars was good though.
Star Wars, well, the 9th episode in the series, or the 3rd television show, or the 4th spin-off movie, or the television special that featured the Ewoks, was all that really necessary? At what point
I would make that case more for Star Trek than Star Wars.
Star Trek? Thank you.
Get your Disney Plus subscription.
Star Trek. Yes, and I love Star Trek.
That should have been a one and done. Star Wars. No.
Star Wars. Yeah, we'll have that fight outside. All I'm gonna say is it's fans that keep going to this well over and over again that
Yeah.
ruin it for everybody. Oleg, how do you know when a story ends, and how do you know when TV series or other forms of literature have just dragged it on so much that the story needs to have ended?
Well, I'll tell you this. Some of my favorite TV shows, I truly wish they did not end. So, starting with Ozark, okay, I think supposedly they said it was their final season, and I truly wish that it was longer. But then the more I thought about it, it's like, I think there's a point within the story where you know that it truly can't go on any longer without having to repeat its plot over again, just maybe with a different set of characters, but it's like the same thing, you know? There were a couple other shows. Bloodline, I thought was exceptional. Peaky Blinders. You know, there's just a variety of shows that I wished continued on. I can see the heads nodding, so okay. It's a millennial type. I'm kidding. No, but it's a lot of these shows that I wish continued on, but they didn't, and so I never really understood like who makes that decision, because clearly there's someone on the back end who is saying that okay, this is an end, or this is an appropriate time to make an ending.
Yeah, you know who that person is the accountant.
Yeah,
That's who it is.
Okay, going back to the story of Star Trek, right? To be completely honest with you, I couldn't get through the first 10 minutes of it. Through the first one. So that's where I felt like the story had ended for me. In the first 10 minutes of that one. Star Wars, I mean, I could watch it days upon days upon days. But a lot of it, I think also when it comes to those storylines, I think quality of production, I think it matters. And I think that is ultimately, at least in my opinion, what keeps a movie going nowadays. I don't know if any of you have seen Top Gun. Have you seen the new Top Gun?
I haven't seen the new one yet.
Okay, it is good. It is really good. So that's where I feel like that is an appropriate sequel to the first one. But then, you know, you look at some of these other ones and it's, I don't know. Hangover. Okay. I feel like a lot of us are familiar with movies like that. After the first one, second or third, it's like, okay, we get the point. Like you get a hangover after a crazy night out.
I will say, though,
how many more hangovers do you need to
sometimes if they are self-knowing sometimes if they're self-knowing about it and it becomes camp, then it's worth it. Like Friday the 13th. They've had like how many of those? By the time Jason was slaughtering people on a spaceship, they knew that they played that out and they were milking it for all it's worth. And I love that. By the time Jason was in Manhattan terrorizing diners.
What was it? If you go to the moon, Manhattan, there was another one. That's when your series is over with.
Yeah. So that's where I feel like there is, it brings up an interesting question though, as far as when does a story end? And I guess it depends who's in charge of telling the story to begin with. I think in the movie industry, I think it's a little bit harder because I think there's more involved. I think when you involved revenue and when you know that, okay, first Hangover was a hit, probably the second one will be, and the third one, I don't even know if they're going to make a fourth one, but it's like you just continue to draw it in because there's an interest, people are invested in the plot, and it's relatable. So therefore, it's easier to replicate. You just swap out some characters, change the plot, change the setting of where it's happening, and then you could probably repeat. And there's another one, I don't know if any of you, what's it called? Fast and Furious?
Fast and the Furious. Yep, that was the exact example I was thinking
of. It's got to
of.
be what of that? 10? Maybe going on to like 11?
Yeah, and isn't like Vin Diesel pushing 70 now?
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what ultimately are we Fast and Furious towards retirement or towards?
They only have so many movies. They're almost like this next one I believe is the last one.
Well, they've even got a new Home Alone out. How many times
God.
you leave your kid?
Yeah.
That
Jurassic
was
Park.
One that after the second one. Now, see, I've heard two ones that I've heard of recently. I haven't seen the new Jurassic Park. Have any of you seen the new Jurassic Park yet?
No.
Have you seen
it? Did
you see it? Okay. The reason why I wanted to see it so badly is the nostalgia factor.
It's the only
because
thing.
Exactly, because it was bringing back people from the other movies, and I loved that. Same thing with the newest Ghostbusters. I was not thrilled with the one that they did prior to this with the ladies. No offense, it wasn't for me. But this one that just came out, I loved because of the nostalgia. They brought back Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and then they had the hologram of the other character, which it was maybe the storyline wasn't so great, but I loved the nostalgia of it, the character part. Was it necessary? I don't know.
See, it was those emotions.
There's emotion in it, absolutely.
Here is a movie, and I'll be curious to hear all of your opinion on this, that I truly believe should have stopped at 1. Jumanji.
See, I like the new ones.
You did.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. Like what? Because I felt like the first one was just so good. And the second one, and I'm not trying to judge the characters or anything, but I just felt like the plot of the first one was just so like iconic, something that I remembered. And then as soon as I started watching this one, I felt like it was a lot more comedy than the first one, which had some elements of comedy. I mean, when you had like monkeys, stealing guns from the police and shooting, and then you had old elephants and stuff like that running through it. I think this one was just too much of a focus on Kevin Hart, Dwayne Johnson, rather than just the plot alone. And that's another thing I wonder, like when it comes to movies or just life in general, can the character of the story ultimately end the plot?
Yeah, well, first part of that with the Jumanji, but the new ones I actually liked. I thought they went a completely different route. They didn't try to do the exact same thing that they did in the first ones. I do think I think if a character is cast incorrectly, I think it can kill a story before it even gets started. But something you were kind of alluding to a little while ago, Oleg. We've been talking about movies. What about relationships? They're relatable. When do you know when it's time to walk away from a relationship or friendship?
Well, let's bring on all of our ex-partners.
Yeah. I'll tell you how I used to know that before I was in my current relationship. It was that I would get a subtle headache. And it would be like they would be around and I would just feel like this sense of fatigue or exhaustion in my head. And I couldn't figure out what it was. Then finally I realized, this happens every time I'm ready to break up with someone. And then I break up with them and mysteriously the headache would be gone. David, I never got that headache with. Thank God.
Well,
my husband's out there watching right now.
Considering that he's behind.
Well, look, we've had a long time to break up at this point. I mean, at some point after over 24 years, if you're not happy, get the hell out.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I think for me, what I've realized is I can't say I've experienced the headaches part, but everyone has their own ending to the story. But for me, it was just more so like unnecessary battles, unnecessary frustration. And also, I think there became a point where I just realized that the two of us being together truly didn't serve the greater purpose. So whether it's the purpose of like my own personal growth, their personal growth, or the growth of us together. And I think that was one of the harder realizations. I've also realized that depending on how many experiences we had created together, it was harder to walk away from. Because it was so much more than just like a single element. Now I'm walking away from the trust I developed with the person, the level of vulnerability, the intimacy, all these things. And I think, there were definitely times, if I'm being honest about it, that I stayed in it longer than maybe I should have. But then at the same time, you could also make the argument that I stayed in it the exact time that I was meant to stay in it, right?
Well, what sort of relationships were you talking about? Because there does seem to be an assumption in this conversation that the sorts of relationships that we feel we may have stayed in too long are romantic ones, but there's friendships. We're looking back where we've broken up. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I was in that relationship way too long. Like in some cases, it was like I was in a friendship with that person after more than 2 seconds.
Yeah.
That was too long.
I mean, there's a reason why Scott Mason and I are having our last episode today.
Yeah, because we're not friends anymore.
No?
I hate you to death, brother.
I was going to ask, is this too close to the sun to touch this?
Yeah. Jessica.
No, I was just gonna say that, you know, I had a friend who our families were good friends growing up. Our families knew each other. We went to church together. Our families were like the father and the grandfather worked together. They knew each other really well. And a couple years ago, there was something that I had posted on social media, and she didn't like it. And just went on this whole drama about it. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm not here for this at this point in my life right now. And then when I got to thinking about it, the only reason that she and I were ever friends is because my grandma said, you got to go be friends with her. You gotta hang out. Because we know each other, you gotta, play nice. And because it affects everybody else kind of thing. And so I had to kind of reevaluate now at this point in my life, saying, nobody needs to be in a relationship anymore. We're not in that. We don't need to please our families. We don't need to please anybody else. And if there's not that actual genuine, I want to be in this friendship anymore, then we're not being held to that at this point. But I also think about, because, we're moving very soon. And I know that Scott and I talked about this recently about how did I know that our time had come to an end here? Because the first thing I got from messages from people, well, you just bought that house like less than 2 years ago, Jessica, what are you doing? But I think honestly that all of this stuff that we're talking about how we hang on to things sometimes, I thought to myself, I can see now in my head, I was thinking, oh, if I just buy the house, I'll like it here. If it's mine,
How honest.
if I just, it'll be fine. And it wasn't. I tried, and it didn't continue. It doesn't continue to be for me here. And now I get to go home. But how did I know that it was the end? I felt incredibly ungrounded. I felt incredibly unable to find peace here the last 12 years, no matter how much inner work that I did. Home is home. There's my husband bringing it home for us.
Yeah. But you also bring up a really good point. At least it's a good point for me. And it's that there have been so many times where I would connect with different people, for example. And I know that I still find this to be challenging, and I don't know if any of you can relate, but when you connect with someone and you just don't feel this energy or the energy, but you, for some reason, either stumble over the words or you can't find the right words or you don't have the courage to say them, that, hey, maybe this was just meant to be a phone call. And you just drag it on. You say, okay, let's meet up in a week. Let's do this in a month. Let's, kind of continue it on. And I'm realizing now, for me, it's a practice. I mean, it's a practice to acknowledge that, hey, it was meant to be an introduction, and maybe it just served its purpose. I think, if anything, there's that expectation that I probably carry when it comes to a lot of connections, is that I connect with them and I start to assume that, okay, there's no way it's just a single phone call. It's got to be a podcast. It's got to be an event. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. Only to realize that, like, some of those maybe are just solely to be a single phone call. Maybe they're not meant to go on to phone call number 2 or phone call number 3. Do any of you find that challenging?
For me, I always try to find value in anybody that I come in contact with, even the person that I work with that I just, or have worked with or been in a friendship or relationship with, that just, we're not put on this earth to get along. I've realized they have some sort of value. But someone, I was recording with someone the other day, and they brought up this like rock analogy, and I kind of took it, kind of twisted it, but they said, we've got those people that are gems that we hang on to, family, close friends. I consider all three of y'all a gem in my little pouch. But you have the gem relation. Remember that. But then they said you also have those skipping stones.
Yeah.
Where, I may need it. If not, I can kind of fetch it out there. I can probably come back and grab another one later. And then you have stepping stones, which are just ones that just you can't find that value. Their intentions aren't as good as yours are. You can be taken advantage of by those people. But I think for me, it's all about in friendships. I'm a recovering people pleaser. Scott, I may have talked to you about this before, but there was a point where I was just any and everybody. Yeah, let me talk to them. Let me connect with them. Maybe over the past year, it's like you said, Oleg, it's become, all right, I'm going to have a phone call with this person. But if I'm not feeling them after the phone call, and it's just it's like, wow, when is this going to end? But if I'm not feeling it, I don't really waste my time anymore. But yeah, I think that's kind of, I get that gut feeling now. Intuition or something, I don't know, but that's just how I've learned to kind of step back from things.
Brittany's remark actually touches on a part of what you were saying, that not every relationship is meant to be everything forever. In her case, it appears as though she's principally talking about romantic relationships, but that could be about friendships. It could be about networking. It can be about everything. I like that analogy that you brought into the room just now, Bodhi, of the different types of stones that people may represent in life, because it's not dualistic. And people can go back and forth from one to the other. I do consider certain people to be the gems or the primary top of tier contacts and relationships that I have, those that I bother to keep in touch with outside of transactional purposes or just because someone told me I need to get to know them. Sometimes that is immediate, almost from the beginning. Sometimes it takes a little while to develop. And then there's those that are surprising, where I thought that this would be one of those gems that I'd have in my pocket forever. And then suddenly, after years, you realized that maybe it wasn't what you thought it was. Particularly for me, what's hurtful is the ego blow that comes when I realize that I may have valued them, but they saw apparently next to no value in me. And I think there is a certain pain, by the way. Bodhi, when you said a second ago, I try and see value in everyone, I agree with that so fundamentally and so within my heart, because I'm someone that has been throughout my life seen as having next to no value. So I understand how it feels to be that person that people nominalize or think is trivial or not worth the time. But balancing that sense of empathy, a challenge for me is that then there are people that genuinely are not offering value. Now, they may not be the users that you talked about, like the stepping stones, Bodhi, but they may be people that are well-intentioned, that are nice, that are concerned, that are perfectly benign, but they just bring nothing to the table in the orbit of someone, i.e. me, who happens to have gets very easily crowded with people that want to have a relationship of some sort or another. Do any of you all feel that, and how do you navigate it?
I'll expand upon that. So I believe I have a slightly different belief. I believe that everyone has value, but not everything everyone says has value. So what I mean by that, I think even in those moments where I'm sitting in a conversation and let's say I'm not agreeing with anything the person says, how I'm choosing to extract value from that conversation is that I'm choosing to sit in it and remind myself that, okay, maybe this is a time for me to work on my discomfort. Maybe this is a time for, because that's the other thing about value, is so much of it is up to interpretation, right? Because I could meet with someone and let's say I put them in a box. I say, okay, their box is they're supposed to provide me a speaking engagement. They're supposed to introduce me to a podcast. They're supposed to introduce me to this and that. And what I'm finding a lot of the time is that much of the time that doesn't actually happen. There's something else that actually happens within that. For example, if I'm introduced to someone and the whole topic is about me being a guest or them being a guest, then that's the only thing we focus on. Like, I feel like we miss an entirely different world that we could dive into that could actually be both of our strengths. So I think when it comes to, for me, when it comes to finding and extracting that value, I really do try and go into the conversations with, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the agenda is. You know, we might have a subject matter to get a conversation going, but then at the end of the day, it's like, all I could do is just pose my ask, saying, I'm looking for help with X, Y, and Z. And if the person can help me with that, great. So I that's how I kind of look at it. I do believe that everyone has value, but not everything everyone says is of value.
It might not be for up to, you know, adding to what you're saying, it might not be up to us to, or part of our journey to see certain value. And even talking about as a person has value, part of the challenge that I see people having regularly, and Scott and I had a little bit of the similar conversation before the show today, is that, you know, someone might have, we might say, oh, I love this person is great, they have so much value in their life, in our lives, and then they say something, or we find out that they have a different belief than us, or suddenly we find something out and we just take all that value that we said that they had and we throw it right in the garbage. And we have a really hard time as humans compartmentalizing and acknowledging the value that someone might have, while at the same time going, I might not value this part, but they still have value in this area.
It goes as to a tendency that I think is very easy for us to fall into. It's very easy for many people to fall into. One of the things that I've learned through the course of this show, and I've really come to appreciate, is being very careful about the word we, us, anything that sort of universalizes the human experience. There are some human experiences that are universal, like death, but most of them are not. And certainly feeling states or reactions to certain stimuli, there's almost nothing that's universal about that. So thank you for that correction. But it can be very easy for me to just sort of slide into black or white. They're good or they're bad. They're smart or they're not. They are friendly or they're not. They're a taker or they're a giver. They are someone that I'm going to walk the path with, or their path is only on the other side of the street and moving in the direction that I'm not going in, and they better get in that direction fast.
Yeah. Look, something I catch myself, and I started to do this in a whatever time frame, and I'm just becoming aware of it, and I'm actively trying to change it, but I don't know what to change it to. Almost every conversation I go into, I end it with, how can I support you? I'm assuming the other person needs support.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not what they're looking for. You know, a really good friend of mine, he has taught me over the years, we've had conversations on a weekly basis for a number of years by now. And he'll literally tell me, he's like, I don't really need support. I just want to spend the hour with you. And it kind of hit me. I was just like, oh, okay, so not everyone's looking for the to-do list at the end of the conversation. And so it's interesting how that works. And I don't know. I still find myself repeating it. I don't really know how to transition out of it.
Well, that's interesting, because also word choice goes as to how a story can turn. Story is dependent on language, whether it's the language that's been written or put onto a script or that we utter through our mouths, or it is the language that we frame our interactions within that story by. And the word support, for instance, I hear that sometimes, and my gut reaction is that person, and this is not a fair reaction, it's my gut reaction, I do not pretend that it's an accurate one at all, is the person is saying, I need support. The person saying, I'm weak. When I hear support, how can I support you? I hear instinctively this image of me sobbing and them saying, "Oh, let me hold you, baby." I don't need that. I don't need that. But I do need, if I'm able to pull back and think about language and what the other person's intention might be, as opposed to the story that I'm creating in my mind, they're simply doing that in a way because they want to support what I'm trying to achieve. It's not necessarily any assumption that I'm some tenderbiddle, but that I may have something that's worthwhile that they want to, that they want to help build up. And so language, both how it occurs within a discussion as well as how we interpret that, has a powerful impact as to what that story means, and perhaps even whether we feel that story should be ending or not. Even a relationship, since we were talking about relationships, friendships, and otherwise, ending.
For me, I think that me personally, whenever someone says that to me, when they say, if Oleg or Jessica or Scott, if one of the three of you were to tell me, "Hey, glad we connected. If you ever need anything, I'm here to support you." However, I would take that as, "Oh, wow, how cool of them." And I've had that a lot podcasting. I've been like, "Oh, that's so nice of them." But then some people that I don't have the best relationships with, when they say something like, "Hey, do you need anything? I can help you with anything," then I do take it as, wow, they think I'm not capable of handling this. And it could be the same exact scenario with two different people. It's all about how I perceive that person, or what the status of our relationship is. It's how I personally interpret that.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, it's funny. Trust goes into a lot of this. There was a boss I had once who was notorious, and I think I've talked to folks on the show about this, who was notoriously sweet. And everything was said with a chirpy, sing-songy little way. Jessica's laughing because I know you know some people like that, don't you? That's why you got that sort of giggle.
I might be one on occasion.
And I heard all sorts of language that was loving and tender, and then I looked down and my stomach had been slashed open and my guts were hanging out and there was blood on the floor everywhere. I was about to kill.
Okay, I'm not that person. I take it back.
Because sometimes, right, the intention or the way in which we say something or the behaviors that we engage in long term may erode trust. That means that we are inclined to, that I may be inclined to create a story in my head around what their true intentions are based on past experience. When really, for all I know, they could have turned over a new leaf, or maybe they saw something to benefit themselves out of being nice and gentle to me, so they decided to do that, which I really don't care about all the time, because it benefits and supports me. Okay, I'll take it. I don't care what your motives are. So, that's trust does to me play into the twists and turns of a story, particularly those with regards to our interactions with other human beings. Bodhi, have you ever known anyone who was sweet?
Yes, I do. I've worked with my fair share of people who have done that. Like you said, they'll sit there and you leave the conversation knowing you just got walked all over with their tone. And for the longest time, that would it would eat me up. I started to see through it. I think older I got, maturity, I was able to kind of navigate around that now. But yeah, I've dealt with my fair share of those.
Bless your heart, Tripp.
I'm interested. Jessica, you said you were kind of.
That was sweet.
That's not a compliment for those of you who aren't familiar with Bless Your Heart. But I'm curious, Jessica, because you said, you're like, I could possibly be that person at times.
I think we all are capable of having that sort of yin and yang within us. But I will say regarding that, I was referring to being more like sing-songy, and then when he got to the other part, I'm like, wait, no, that's not me. But I've had that experience though of I've heard often, because I'm from New England, but I've lived here in Alabama for 12 years, and I can say all of this very lovingly because my dad's in the South. My dad lives in Charleston, South Carolina, and everybody's just sweet as pie out there.
Mhm.
And but here in the here in the South, things are sugar coated and deep
Oh yeah.
fried and just sweet as pie. And then when they get home, it is another story.
Some gospel.
And after church on Sunday, it's another story. And I've often heard from people here how rude we are up north. But I think, as an adult, I've come to appreciate that. I appreciate when someone says to my face, "Look, I don't like you. I don't like what you're selling, and here we're done. We're done. That's it." And I'm like, "Great, pave the way for me to walk home. That's fine with me." And so it's Miss Brittany. No, we've talked about this before, but I think I appreciate more when people are a little more honest now than sugar, because eventually you're just going to get diabetes if you have too much of that sugar coated stuff.
Don't tell me you love me and then go to Cracker Barrel and sit around the table and badmouth me. Tell me right there. I've learned to
Or
appreciate
at Bible study, they go to Bible study and gossip.
I've grown up in the South my whole majority of my life until I joined the military. And when I joined and I started interacting with people who were not from the Southeast, I was like, wow, such a rude person. They just told me they don't like me. Now, 12 years, 13 years, whatever it is in the military under my belt, I appreciate that. And now whenever I go back to, and I'm in Alabama right now, but especially when I go back to like South Carolina, North Carolina, and people are, "It is so good to see you." Yeah. Bless your heart. Now I leave thinking like, what are their motives? Do I really, how do they really feel? Are they going to get in the car or start texting and badmouth? But everywhere else, they'll tell you how, even when I was in Europe, the Germans that I had interacted with, they would tell you how they felt.
Yeah.
They had a problem with you. They flat out told you. But yeah, the sugar coating in the South, it's a real thing.
Yeah. New York, it's even worse. Tell them, Scott.
That's why I love New York. It's interesting because I went to college in Minnesota, and in Minnesota they didn't sugarcoat, but it was more. It was called Minnesota Nice. And everyone, everyone loved being nice. And if you were, it was a more stoic thing. It wasn't. They didn't just get maple syrup and drown you in it, but you would be quietly, politely ostracized if you offended people. I found it as a leader there in organizations, in a way, fun. I took that as, okay, you're going to sit here and just be all nice. I'll bulldoze you. And I bulldozed people, and that was cool. But you do make enemies that way. And people would say things like, "Scott's outspoken." Now, for years, I thought that was such a compliment. Then I realized that, I might as well have been called an axe murderer in that culture.
You get labeled as difficult.
Difficult. Yeah. A diva.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Would you say in New York it's more like hot sauce on your pancakes?
Hey, look, the stereotype is somewhat true. People do say what they feel. They may say it to varying degrees of vulgarity, and I like the vulgarity. I'm a monster that way. I'll say all sorts of things. But that being said, also then the energy and the vulgarity and all the that sort of stuff happens, and then it's over. And what I have a challenge with, and what the Minnesota Nice I experienced was, and I don't know what it's like in the South, that was so difficult, was the fact that things never seemed to end. You would have this interaction and you thought things were over because everyone was being all sweet and nice. Then you'd find out like they hated your ass.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that those are much harder to read, those conversations. And I like what Philip just said, direct is good. I'm more so at that stage, I guess, now, just trying to receive more direct feedback, because otherwise it just becomes so much harder to get around and try and figure out what was that person actually trying to say, how does it apply to my situation, all these things. So sometimes it's as difficult as it is. In fact, I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and I guess we had 2 back to back, and the second one I had with him, he started off by saying, he's like, you know what, I'm actually sorry partially for what I said because I was too direct. But for me, it was good. I mean, it was exactly what I needed to hear. I mean, yeah, it hurt my feelings a little bit, but I, took the week, processed it, and I think if anything, it gave a different flavor to the friendship and possibly take a different trajectory. And I think that's one of the things that I'm starting to appreciate more than ever are the friendships that are able to be direct. The friendships that I could tell it to, they could tell it to you the way it is. I had another conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about feedback. How do you receive feedback from people? And we were talking about how there's a difference between how one receives feedback from those who are close to him versus complete strangers.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that the people who are closest to me, sometimes whenever I ask for feedback, it's more of a pat on the back. Great job. I'm really happy you did it. And all that I think is necessary. But then there's also a certain point where I feel like I'm looking for growth, and maybe that falls back on me, right? Maybe that falls back on me in communicating that. If I send something out, give it to me all. The good, the bad, everything in between. Like, how could you improve this if you were me? So maybe it goes back into communication as far as from my end.
You're talking about growth, Oleg, and it's interesting
Yeah.
because we were talking about growth also at the beginning of the hour when we talked about plot stories and what makes a story that we might have seen on TV ready to end, and the issue of character growth or character transformation or the point of the story, which presumably would lead to some sort of intellectual engagement and ideally growth. As related to whatever that media is, sort of signaling when the end of the story should, quote unquote, should occur. This is, as we discussed at the top of the hour, the last episode of this show. And one of the things that I want to acknowledge, all 3 of you, as well as other folks that have been on the show, everyone from people like John Dillo and Paul Newell and Summer Watson, Jen Fontanilla, Joe Bogdan, John Jefferson, Casey Berman, Lachelle Adkins, others that I know I'm forgetting, Steve
Tripp
Gamlin.
Bodenheimer.
Well, we're going to get to those
Edward
special people.
Bodenheimer. Sorry.
Those, we're going to get to those in a minute, but I'm explicitly not ignoring. I'm explicitly not mentioning you two, Jessica and Bodhi, for a reason. Is that I've learned and grown so much. They in every interaction on this show and through the process of the show itself have been vehicles of growth that have kept my own story growing and moving, not to mention my character becoming more and more. They've added depth to the point of my life and my existence. We're going to be ending this show forever, probably in about 15 minutes or so. So I'd like to get some thoughts from all of you, including you, Tripp and Jessica, about what being part of this journey has meant to you. But before I do that any further, I would like to express gratitude to all 3 of you for being such a beautiful part of this one story being more complete. Jessica, I'm going to pick on you.
Got out of it last time, not this time. Okay, so when I first, heard about you guys doing the show, and I heard squirrel, I'm like, you're making a show about my spirit animal. Here it is. I have shared before, ever since I can remember, my mind, it's like the next Alice in Wonderland sequel. I'm always in the rabbit hole. I'm always trying to see every side of the coin, of the situation, of a person, of just everything. And this space that you all created here just is that beautiful rabbit hole experience. And the ability for me, even at times when maybe certain people would say things that were not in alignment with what I believed, it allowed me to see that other perspective. And it allowed me to either stand firm in what I thought, or bend a little bit, see things a little bit differently. And I have always felt really at home and part of the show, even when I'm not on it. You guys are really I've always been really good about including people that comment, and their thoughts are just as important as everyone on the screen. And I've always appreciated that as well. But yeah, it's been a great part of my Thursday evenings, and will be really missed, really missed, because I love Oleg coming up with 800 questions that we shouldn't think about at the most inappropriate times, and then taking them to other people and being like, what do you think about this question? And they'd be like, why are you talking about that? Like, Oleg, thanks for that. It's so good though. It's been a really good time, and I just appreciate I I think it's needed. I would like to see 3 more seasons, but I'll digress on that.
Bodie, this show would not have been the same without you. You are a squirrel. I still remember the very first time you were on as a guest. I think you came back a couple of times, or maybe you were a guest on another show that Oleg was hosting. I was sort of a sidekick on that one. And we had a talk about you. I remember us saying how you're so smart, yet you keep it real. And there's this real humility.
Yeah.
And you could talk about highfalutin intellectual topics in a way that was grounded, but you also might mention your trip to Walmart along the way in a way that wasn't like, I'm trying to be one of the regular people. It was like, this is who I am, and this is the milieu that I grew up in. And that I felt was such a rare quality, such a beautiful quality, and it's something that you've brought over and over and over. I can speak for myself to know that I can get very... I can fly off into the clouds sometimes. And you always manage to tether the discussions in reality, and your sense of humor never waned. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for that, and for really being a squirrel and being consistent and being here with us. So with all of that said to you, and you can go on your own thing, talk to us a little bit about your own reflections on this journey together, and how it's impacted your story, if at all.
Proverbs 27:17. I think that I'm better because of this. I'm better because of my interactions with the 3 of you. I'm even joining Jessica tomorrow, and we connected because of this. And for me, you saying, wow, you're smart, that's something I struggled with for most of my life. I was told by my 4th grade teacher, you're an idiot in front of class, and everything scarred me for most of my life. And I think that this platform allowed me not just to grow, because we were talking about growth earlier, but it's allowed me to grow personally and professionally. In terms of digging deep with some questions. I think Jessica brought it up. Oleg, we were talking about something one day. It was like, when do you know how to let something go? And Oleg started talking about a pair of basketball socks, and that I would never think of. But for me, as an educator, and for someone who basically facilitates guided discussions for a living, I think I know that this platform here, and coming in with basically just a topic, hey, we're going to talk about, an epic ending. For me to take that back to my classroom and have every 5 to 6 weeks, 12 to 24 students come through and say, okay, now y'all have a topic. Y'all are scared to death to talk about it for 5 minutes. Now talk about it for 45 minutes. Go. And the practice has been remarkable. It's made me a better educator, and it's made me better at the facilitation. So I can't thank y'all enough for seeing that value, taking a chance with me to be on here. Forever grateful. Y'all are the gems. Y'all are gems. Y'all are level.
That's how I feel about you too, my brother. Oleg,
Yes.
I remember the very first episode that we did. We had talked about it in advance. I remember having our conceptual meetings. I was on vacation in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. While I was on vacation, there's family. Didn't just go because I had nowhere better to go. And you said that you were going to share a very personal story that was funny because we wanted to make sure that this show had a lot of laughs in it. And it involved I believe, trip home from the bus, the school bus. Do you remember that story?
Yeah.
And
my pants. Yeah.
yes, and that set a tone
Yeah.
for where this would go because there were no holds barred. When someone's talking about pooping their pants, there's nothing that's off limits.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that we can't laugh at. Talk to me a little bit about where this show has been on your journey. And how working with wonderful folks like Jessica and Tripp and all the others, I forgot to mention Brian and Chris, what on earth is going through my head, has changed you and helped your journey become more powerful.
I think for me, there've been many things that I'm grateful for. I think first starting with creating the space and understanding the value of it. I know that I've spoken to many people about this. Everyone who joins on the Saturdays, it's like I genuinely believe in creating a space where you could share perspectives and have the ability to shift your own perspective through the listening of other people's stories and journeys. This is what the show has been for me. Where I was 2 years ago, different person, similar values, similar character, similar vision, but just different person. Significantly more confident and courageous when it comes to a lot of this. I remember a quick story actually about all three of you. So first time I met Scott Mason, this was, I think it was 3 years ago, going on to 3 years. I was talking to a woman named Leah Frankel. Her and I were talking about different ways to start a podcast. She was looking to start a podcast, and she was referred to me by Adam Posner to connect to Leah. So I connected with Leah, and then afterwards, Leah's like, how can I help you? How can I support? You've given me everything you could. So I just shared a couple of things, and she said, also, I'm going to connect you to this guy named Scott Mason. And I was like, whatever, I'll take the phone call. I'm kidding. I was like, of course, I'll take the phone call. And I think we had a 15-minute phone call booked that pretty sure lasted 3 hours.
It was really long.
3 hours
In a good
long.
way.
And Scott Mason was taking notes the whole time. Yeah. And I remember right after the phone call ending it with, we need to find a way to stay in touch. We need to find ways to collaborate. And I think that's where we started to figure out ways to kind of create this show and all this stuff. Similar thing, with Jessica, when you and I first met and have been able to stay in touch ever since, it's like, I think the impact that I've finding from my interactions with you is you, along with Casey Berman and a handful of others, are truly like the only people that I have ever come across that are able to keep the event as neutral. Like it's all about, like it's all, a friend of mine, Christopher Keys, once told me, and he continues to repeat that, he said, everything around you is just information. What you choose to do with it, how you choose to look at it, what meaning you choose to assign to it is completely your choice. But outside of it, it's all information. Someone being pissed at you outside on the street, that's just information. You're choosing to interpret it as someone who's mad at you. This whole thing, this is all just information. Whatever you take from it is completely up to you. Bodhi is the same exact way. Every time we've connected, I feel like we never missed a beat. And there have been times when you're not connected and it's been like months. Sometimes it's been a year. Sometimes it's been however long. And the other thing that I'll mention about you, Bodhi, is I was, and I don't know if you remember this, I was in Africa. I was in Ghana. Bodhi and I were doing a podcast together, the two of us. and I was covered with one of those mosquito nets.
Yep.
I barely had enough light on because I was at this resort that was just using all natural resources. And so, like, literally the entire screen was just pitch black, and there's just voices coming from the screen. And I remember sharing with you the story about how, I kind of hit a rough spot there.
Mhm.
And the level of concern you showed was, it surprised me because I didn't feel like we had that level of connection. But you checked up on me in the morning. You made sure I got out safely. Pretty sure you warned even some of the other people just in case, things were going to have to be escalated. And it just showed that, like, here's a person who cared. And that's how I felt like in this space is I really feel like I've connected with people who truly care and who want to find ways to be in your life, regardless of how often we stay in touch or whether we leave a like or leave a comment or leave a whatever on each other's posts. It's like I genuinely know that here are the people that really want what's best for me. And I think that's really rare. I think that's really rare to find in people. My experience has taught me is like that's 1 in 1,000, maybe even higher.
Before we go on to the final person who has been a huge part of this show, I want to give everyone a very brief minute to just share where they can find out more about you so that they can continue to be a part of your journey.
Well, what about yourself?
In my case, I think that it has helped me expand as a human being. It's helped me think more deeply. It's helped build relationships with people. It's helped me practice being spontaneous, like is the case with Bodhi. It's helped me be comfortable in front of a live audience and feel safe. It's also taught me things that I could be doing differently and should be doing differently. Beliefs that I might have had that were not necessarily logical or consistent with my values, or things coming out of my mouth that I need to keep to myself sometimes. That's been another recurring theme. We don't always need to comment on stuff. So this has been a powerful, transformative experience, not to mention the deepening of the relationships. Like you mentioned, Oleg, not just with those that are hosts on this show or guests, but who are in the audience week after week, like you have been, Jessica. Now,
every Thursday, Jessica was there.
yeah.
Happy Thursday, happy Squirrel Day. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You can find out more about me on purposehighway.com. That's where my podcast, Scott Mason's Purpose Highway, is. Or you can find out more about me and follow me at s.scottmason on LinkedIn. But Purpose Highway is Scott Mason Central right now. Jessica, let's go to you.
Is it named like that on purpose?
Yes, there are too many Scott Masons out there. And so I'm the only S.Scott Mason. Bodhi, actually, I know you have to go. So let's get you on very quickly.
Yeah, so for me, The Shadows Podcast, you can find it at theshadowspodcast.com, actually released a very emotional episode today. Today, my father would have been 71 years old. He passed away when I was 11. So it's been about 30 years since we last spoke, but I chronicled his journey. I reached out to a lot of family, friends, and I did a lot of digging and basically chronicled his journey for 42 years of his life. And coolest episode I've ever released.
Wow.
Definitely give us some love over there. We're about to start our new spinoff series, Rise from the Shadows, season 2, Behind the Mask. We're going to focus on the emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental domains that we go through and the many masks that we wear throughout life. So first episode is going to drop August 1st. So definitely check us out, theshadowspodcast.com.
Amazing stuff.
Can you briefly elaborate? What do you mean by chronicle the journey for 42 years?
Yeah, we talked about his childhood, his upbringings, going through college, joining the Navy, going through law school, some of the issues he had personally and professionally in his life. Wow. And basically just that's kind of what we do. For those who haven't checked it out on The Shadows, is we chronicle people's journeys. We talked about that classic story arch. We have that. We have the highs and lows, and then we leave you with being motivated and inspired by the end.
Jessica, where can people find out more about you?
The best place to go is thebreakthroughshow.com. Very speaking of nostalgia, having a whole moment this week. Next Wednesday is the 4th birthday of the Breakthrough Show and the Breakthrough Show Network. And now we have 9 shows. And to celebrate that, we are doing a full day event. Every host on the network that has a show, we're running the entire show, every show from 7 a.m. until 8:30 p.m. at night, Central Time. So you can go to thebreakthroughshow.com. You'll see more information about that coming up this weekend. And then that's next Wednesday, like I said. And I also have to give a little mini shout out to my good friend, my co-host of Throwback Thursday that I was on with before this. Kevin Kiley has a new single out tonight. So I just wanted to tell him I love him so much and congratulations.
Thank you. Oleg, talk.
Plain and simple, overcoming odds. That's where people can find a lot of the stories and different podcasts that you mentioned. Outside of that, LinkedIn, Facebook, those are the 2 platforms that people can find me. And right now I'm exploring the topic of different ways to use curiosity to overcome invisibility. So invisible aspects of ourselves, our identity. So for anyone who feels invisible or who has ever felt when they were invisible in their lives, please reach out, and we'd love to hear your stories.
Before we say goodbye, for good this time, at least in this platform, on this show, there's one other person who's been instrumental in making sure it succeeded. That's Patrick Bardsley. He is the CEO of Spectrum Design, and it was his vision to create a company that provides real, meaningful career path work for folks on the autistic spectrum who otherwise might not have jobs at all. That company has now expanded into 2 cities. It has been here with us as a sponsor for more than a year, and it has been a privilege to have Spectrum and Patrick as part of our family. He's been a guest on this too. We're going to turn the show over to that final commercial, but I say this with love, and I say this holding back tears. I want to thank you 3 so much, and everyone else who's been a part of this show, for being here with us. You've changed my life. I hope we've changed yours. I think we've gotten out of that rut.